A while ago on a video I made about family estrangement, I got a comment along the lines of, "This is really helpful, but how do you know if it's safe to reconnect with somebody that you've previously estranged yourself from?" And I thought that was a really important topic, and I hope that this video doesn't get lost in the algorithm because I think it's just as important to talk about when it's time for reconciliation as it is to talk about when it's time to move on from a relationship. I personally am a big believer that people can change. And a lot of that is just because of the fact that I changed a lot from when I was younger. But I also think even though people have a massive capacity for change, it's really, really hard, and that work is something that a lot of people choose not to do. But in this video, I want to break down what are the signs that someone has truly changed in case you want to try to repair the rupture. Let's dive in. So before I talk about the signs that someone has changed, I want to talk about the preconditions of change, because the signs that someone has changed will make a lot more sense after I explain the preconditions, what is sort of needed for somebody to change. Number one, they have to want to change, and they have to want it intrinsically, not extrinsically. So for example, somebody with a substance abuse problem, they're not going to commit to sobriety no matter how much their loved ones beg them to, until they themselves want to. In the stages of change model, there are different stages of change, like it sounds. So first, people start by pre-contemplating. They're not even really contemplating changing yet. They're even earlier than that. Then they shift into the contemplation stage, where they're starting to think about what it would look like to change. Then they go into the preparation stage, where they start actually preparing to take action. Then they take action. Then they try to maintain the change that they've created. And in some cases, they might relapse and start all over again, whereas in other cases, they might stay in the maintenance phase. So someone with a substance abuse problem, they're first not even going to consider changing. Then they might start contemplating it. Then they start preparing for it. Then they start taking actions to stay sober. And then they try to maintain those actions. So it begs the question, what makes someone progress from one stage of change to the next? What brings on that intrinsic desire to change? The consequences of not changing have to become too painful to tolerate, where the consequences of not changing now outweigh the benefits of not changing. So the highs, they no longer feel as high as they used to. The come down is starting to feel worse and worse every time. They're wasting so much money on the substance. They're pushing people away. They can no longer focus at work. Their health is declining. Often it takes people getting to like a rock bottom where it becomes abundantly clear that the consequences of not changing are just too painful. Because sometimes the benefits of not changing are just too good. Some people, like for example, functional alcoholics, don't get hangovers, are still able to do their responsibilities, still really enjoy what it's like to binge drink. Those people are probably not going to want to change until things get really, really bad, like running someone over during a DUI. So far, the preconditions for someone changing is they have to intrinsically want it. They have to want it themselves, not because of any external pressures. And usually the way they get to that wanting it themselves is by the consequences of not changing are really starting to outweigh the benefits. And then change requires a massive amount of effort. They have to put in a lot of energy in order for them to change. They need to consistently keep at the forefront of their mind why they need to change, why it's aligned with their values. This is what I talk about in the Goal Getter course, because the Goal Getter course is all about like achieving something that you want. You're not going to achieve what you want unless you keep it very much at the forefront of your mind why you want that thing and why it's aligned with your values. In order for people to change, they need to hold themselves accountable. They need to have systems in place holding them accountable. For example, therapy, AA, a sponsor, friends who know they're sober now who are going to hold them accountable if they see them drinking. Change requires day by day, minute by minute micro decisions. It's not a one and done thing. It's something that requires perseverance. That's why people in AA say, for example, take it one day at a time. We'll see if we want to drink tomorrow, but today, let's just make it through today. It's more like a resistance marathon than a sprint. The person needs to find that capacity for resilience within themselves. So if someone doesn't have that intrinsic intrinsic motivation to change, they're not going to stick with it. It's just going to be too hard. They're not going to have the resilience to run that marathon. So those are the preconditions for change. Those things are what is needed for someone to change. But what are the signs that someone has changed, that they've met those preconditions? First of all, they take full accountability. When you genuinely changed, it doesn't matter to you in that moment if the other person reciprocates. It doesn't have to be this thing where it's like, okay, I'm taking accountability for my part, now can you take accountability for yours? If you genuinely feel like you are in the wrong for something, you want to take accountability for that more than you want to receive accountability in return. People who have not changed might take quasi-responsibility, which is where they're just saying what they think will rope you back in. They're framing it as, we both did wrong, where they're just kind of waiting for you to apologize back. They don't actually think they're at fault. If you actually think you were at fault, you don't need to hear the other person apologizing to you because you take full responsibility. And ideally, in a healthy relationship, both people are taking full accountability. Even if it was like this person did 90% of the wrong. If this person did 10% of the wrong, they accept this person taking full accountability and then they take full accountability for what they think they did wrong. But when someone's not sorry, they're only taking 50% accountability, sometimes even less. Or they're blaming somebody other than themselves. They're still trying to find a reason for why they did what they did. Full responsibility looks very different. It's just putting the apology out there without expectation of reciprocation or forgiveness. Usually this comes from an internal realization that they did something wrong. It doesn't come from external pressures, like someone telling them to apologize, or them running out of friends, or them wanting something from you. Those are all external pressures. If they're apologizing because of any of those things, they're probably not genuinely sorry. And after they apologize for you, if they've taken full responsibility, they respect your boundaries. So if you say, "Thank you, I still don't forgive you," they're like, "I get it, that's fine." What sorts of things make a person realize that they wronged another person? Oftentimes it's a serious crisis. Like I was talking about that, like rock bottom. Somebody might be completely abandoned by their support system. They might lose everything. They might have no choice but to look themselves in the face and recognize that they are responsible for all these things that happened to them. Other times it's just very intense inner work, like a person going to therapy or just self-reflecting on their own about their pattern of behavior. Like I once reached out to a friend to apologize about the reasons for our fallout years later because I was doing shadow work. I was just like reflecting on the ugliest parts of myself, and I thought back to this friend and I was like, you know what, I want to message her. Someone being in long-term therapy is a huge predictor of change versus someone still avoiding therapy is probably a sign they're still not willing to look themselves in the face. What sorts of things do not make a person want to apologize? Someone telling them they were wrong. I always find it interesting when someone takes issue with something I said on this channel, how they think that if they shame me enough, it will get me to change my mind. I never delete a video because my viewers didn't like it. If I delete a video, it's usually years after the fact because it's just not aligned with my values anymore, either because I feel like it wasn't high enough quality, or I no longer agree with what I said, or I actually think that I made a mistake with what I did. That's change that happens over years, not overnight. And it doesn't happen through shame. So if you're shaming someone for something they did yesterday, do you seriously think that today they woke up and they're like, "Oh, I see that I was wrong, I'm going to apologize now"? That's not how it works. People don't change because they're shamed into it in the short term. People change over long-term work, over experiencing inner crises. Like I was once watching this video by somebody who I really respect, and he was saying something that I completely agreed with at the time, but a lot of his audience found issue with. And the next day when I went to go finish watching the video, it was gone from his channel, just like completely gone. And I remember my respect for him did take a hit. To me, it's just sort of pandering behavior. It's pandering behavior to let your audience sway your content into whatever they want it to be rather than being authentic and showing up as who you truly are in the moment. I don't believe that people who apologize the day after doing something, in most cases, unless there was like something they were truly unaware of, are sorry. Change and accountability happens slowly over time. I want to know that if someone apologizes for something, it's because they genuinely believe it, not because they feel shamed into doing it. And another big sign that someone has genuinely changed is they show it through their actions, not their words. Recently, I was talking with someone, and there was a situation where in the past, this person might have said something passive-aggressive to me or like taken a jab. But instead of doing that, this person spoke to me directly about it. They sort of not aggressively just like brought up the misunderstanding. And that to me was a huge tell. It's like this person is doing the work. This person is probably in therapy because they're changing the pattern. They're no longer doing things that they used to do. They're making healthier choices. When people are genuinely changing, they're not very loud about it. The people who are very loud, that's the facade they want to portray. That's not necessarily what they're doing behind closed doors. A person who genuinely cares about that, they're going to show it through their actions. They're not going to just talk about it constantly. It's the person who goes to volunteer at a soup kitchen quietly instead of publicizing it all the time. So how do you assess that someone's genuinely changed through their actions if you're not currently speaking to them? If you don't have access to see what their actions have been, how do you know if it's safe to let them back into your life? I can usually get kind of an intuitive sense through just micro signs. It could be something as tiny as they stopped subtweeting people on their story and they started instead showing more appreciation for the people they love. Or where in the past they would have reacted instantly with rage, they take a moment to self-regulate before responding. Or instead of talking about themselves all the time, they make sure to ask about your life. Even if you're not like fully back in this person's life, if you have just like a tiny glimpse of the way they interact, usually you can get these tiny micro signs that somebody is changing. And thirdly, when someone has changed, they have more self-awareness. Most people go through life with very high defense mechanisms, which are meant to protect their self-esteem from getting bruised by reality. And that often results in damaging behaviors. Like if somebody is in denial about the fact that they said something hurtful or did something hurtful, that might result in them gaslighting the person about it. Or if somebody cannot handle certain shameful traits about themselves, they will project them onto somebody else, almost like an emotional hot potato. Defense mechanisms show up when the ego is not strong enough to handle reality. Self-awareness is the opposite of that. Self-awareness is when their ego's strong now. They can look the ugliest parts in the face now. It's a continuum. Some people have very, very strong defenses where they cannot see themselves realistically, like people with certain personality disorders. Then there are people who have almost like a naked, unprotected ego that feels very, very raw every time something threatens it, like people with moral OCD. And then there are people, most people, somewhere in the middle, who have like average defenses. They keep their self-esteem in a good place without falling into self-hatred. That's what it's like to be healthy. Now, if you rip off a person's defenses before they're ready to really look it in the face, before they've built up that ego strength, that can be really dangerous. That can result in people having SI, for example. On the other hand, when reality is just too painful to accept, a person might develop defense mechanisms so high that they literally look like psychosis. That person is not in touch with reality. So a big sign that someone has changed is oftentimes they've become more self-aware and shed some of those defense mechanisms that stopped them from previously seeing themselves accurately. You know, like some people who are really not chill at all will self-describe as chill. They'll be like, oh, you know, I'm a laid-back person. I'm just chill. It's like, my brother in Christ, what are you talking about? You are the least chill person. And so what it would look like for that person to sort of rip off a few of their defenses would be if they were to instead say, I can sometimes be a little high maintenance. If you hear a person who previously was like, I'm so chill, now saying, I can be a little high maintenance, maybe that person has changed. Maybe they've developed a little self-awareness. So I hope that this was helpful and answered that person's question, how do you know if somebody has changed, if you want to reconnect with them? I'm also just really interested if you've experienced any of these, or if you think I've missed any signs that a person has changed. Make sure to pop those down below and I'll try to check them out. Take care.